The stagecoach rattled into Redemption, Texas on a blistering afternoon in July of 1878, carrying a woman whose voice would change one man's life forever, though the rest of the town would dismiss her as incomprehensible from the moment she opened her mouth. Dust swirled around the wooden wheels as they creaked to a halt outside the general store, and Jonas McAllister watched from beneath the brim of his hat as the driver climbed down to help his passenger descend. The woman who emerged wore a traveling dress the color of deep wine, now covered in the pale grit of 3 days on the trail from San Antonio. Her dark hair had been pinned carefully that morning, he imagined, but now wisps escaped around a face that seemed both exhausted and determined. She carried herself with a straight spine despite her obvious weariness, and when she turned to retrieve her carpetbag from the driver, Jonas caught sight of dark eyes that swept across the town with an expression he recognized, having worn it himself years ago when he first arrived here with nothing but the clothes on his back and a horse he had raised from a colt. She was assessing whether this place could become home. The driver set down 2 trunks beside her, accepted his fare with a tip of his hat, and climbed back onto his perch without another word. Jonas had been leaning against the post outside the saloon, taking a brief respite from the cattle auction happening down at the stockyard, but something about the woman's solitary figure made him straighten. She looked around as if searching for someone, her gaze moving past the blacksmith's forge where Tom Henderson was hammering at a horseshoe, past the small restaurant where Martha Chen served the best dumplings west of the Mississippi, past the doctor's office with its neatly painted sign. Finally, she seemed to gather her courage and walked toward the general store, leaving her trunks on the boardwalk. Jonas watched as she pushed open the door, heard the bell jangle, and then heard her voice for the first time. "Excuse me, please, I am looking for boarding house." The words came out shaped differently than he was accustomed to hearing English spoken. Each syllable carried weight, a musical quality that rose and fell in unexpected places. The vowels stretched long and round, the consonants harder than soft. He could not place the accent immediately, though he had heard German and Irish and French in his 26 years, both during the war and after, during his years of drifting before he settled in Redemption. From inside the store, he heard Cyrus Webb's reply, loud and slow, as if volume would somehow bridge understanding. "What's that? Speak up, girl. Can't understand a word you're saying." Jonas found himself moving toward the door before he consciously decided to do so. Through the window, he could see the woman's shoulders tense, saw her hands grip the strap of her carpetbag tighter. She tried again, and this time he was close enough to hear more clearly through the open door. "Boarding house. A place to stay. I have letter from Mrs. Adelaide Thornton. She is expecting me." The sounds tangled together in a way that clearly frustrated Cyrus, whose face was reddening with the effort of comprehension or perhaps simple impatience. "Adelaide? Are you saying Adelaide?" "Lord above, where are you from that you talk like that?" "I am from Bialystok," the woman said, pronouncing each syllable carefully. "In Poland. Mrs. Thornton, she wrote to agency in New York." "I am teacher. She needs teacher for children here." But Cyrus was already shaking his head, waving his hands as if to physically dispel the words he could not grasp. "Can't make heads or tails of it. You need to find someone who speaks whatever it is you're speaking, because this ain't working." Jonas pushed through the door, and both Cyrus and the woman turned to look at him. Up close, he could see that her eyes were not merely dark but a deep brown that caught the light filtering through the store's front window, and that despite her travel-worn appearance, she held herself with a dignity that commanded respect. "She's looking for Adelaide Thornton's boarding house," Jonas said quietly to Cyrus, then turned to the woman. "Mrs. Thornton is expecting you. She mentioned to my boss's wife that a teacher was coming from back east." The woman's face flooded with relief so profound that Jonas felt something shift in his chest. Yes, teacher. I teach children English, mathematics, history. Mrs. Thornton wrote to agency. They help me come to America, help me find position. Jonas nodded slowly, listening not just to the words but to the rhythm beneath them, the way she constructed her sentences with a formality that suggested she had learned English from books rather than conversation. I understand you, he said. Welcome to Redemption. I'm Jonas McAllister. I work at the Double R Ranch just outside town. My name is Zuzanna Kowalski, she said, and the name rolled off her tongue like music, soft consonants and vowels that seemed to dance. But please, in America, people call me Anna. It is easier. Zuzanna is a beautiful name, Jonas said, trying to replicate the way she had pronounced it, with the soft sound in the middle. But I'll call you whatever you prefer. For the first time, she smiled, and it transformed her entire face from wary and worn to genuinely lovely. You hear me correctly. You understand me. This is good. In New York at the agency, sometimes people understand, sometimes no. On Stagecoach, driver did not understand almost anything. I was thinking perhaps my English is very bad. Your English is fine, Jonas assured her. You just have an accent, that's natural. You learned a different language first. Cyrus harumphed behind his counter. Well, if you can understand her, Jonas, maybe you ought to take her on over to Adelaide's. I've got inventory to manage, and I can't stand here all day trying to puzzle out foreign talk. Jonas felt a flicker of irritation at the older man's tone, but suppressed it. Cyrus was set in his ways, like many in Redemption, a town that had grown from nothing 15 years ago and still maintained the rough edges of a frontier settlement. I can do that, he said. Miss Kowalski, if you'll wait just a moment, I'll get your trunks. You are very kind, Zuzanna said, her relief still evident. Thank you very much. Jonas stepped back outside and hoisted one trunk onto his shoulder, then grabbed the other by its handle. They were heavy, likely containing everything she owned in the world. He had arrived in Texas with less, just a bedroll and saddlebags, but he had not come from across an ocean, had not left behind an entire country and everyone he had ever known. Zuzanna followed him out onto the boardwalk, and together they walked down the dusty main street toward the far end of town where Adelaide Thornton ran her boarding house, a two-story structure painted white with green shutters. Jonas was aware of eyes following them, of Margaret Price pausing in her sweeping outside the seamstress shop, of young Billy Parker stopping mid-stride to stare as they passed. Have you been in America long? Jonas asked as they walked, wanting to fill the silence and curious about this woman who had traveled so far. 6 weeks I am in New York, Zuzanna said. I stay at Agency House while they arrange position for me. Before that, 2 weeks on ship from Hamburg. Before that, traveling from Bialystok to Hamburg. Very long journey, but I must come. In Poland, there is no future for me anymore. There was something in the way she said those last words that spoke of loss, and Jonas did not press for details. He knew about loss, about leaving things behind that could not be retrieved. The war had taught him that, had taken his 2 older brothers and his father, had left his mother a widow who eventually remarried and moved to California with her new husband. Jonas had drifted for years after Appomattox, unable to settle, until he had found Redemption and the Double R Ranch, where Samuel Richardson had given him a job based on nothing more than Jonas's way with horses, and the fact that he showed up sober and willing to work. Redemption is a good town, Jonas said as they approached the boarding house. It's rough in some ways, like most places out here, but there are good people. Mrs. Thornton is one of the best. She'll take care of you. And the children, there are many children who need teacher. About 15 in town and the surrounding ranches, Jonas said. The last teacher left to get married about 4 months ago. Mrs. Thornton has been teaching reading to some of them in her front room, but she's getting on in years and it's too much for her. The town was pleased when she found you. They climbed the steps to the front porch, and Jonas set down the trunks to knock on the door. Moments later, it swung open to reveal Adelaide Thornton herself, a woman of perhaps 65 with silver hair pinned in a neat bun and eyes that were sharp but kind behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Jonas McAllister, what brings you to my door in the middle of the afternoon?" she began, then her gaze shifted to Zuzanna and her face lit up with recognition. "Oh. Oh my goodness, you must be Miss Kowalski. You're here. I was expecting you tomorrow or perhaps the day after. Come in, dear child." Zuzanna's smile returned, broader this time. "Mrs. Thornton, yes, I am Zuzanna Kowalski." "The stagecoach made good time," the driver said. "I am very happy to meet you." Adelaide's expression flickered with momentary confusion at the accent, but she recovered quickly, stepping aside to usher them in. "Well, come in out of the heat. Jonas, be a dear and bring those trunks up to the front bedroom on the second floor. Miss Kowalski, you must be exhausted. Let me get you some water and something to eat." Inside, the boarding house was cool and dim, a relief after the blazing sun outside. The front room was furnished simply but comfortably, with a settee and several chairs arranged around a braided rug. Bookshelves lined one wall, and Jonas noticed a small slate board propped in the corner, evidence of Adelaide's teaching efforts. He carried the trunks upstairs while Adelaide led Zuzanna toward the kitchen, talking in a steady stream about the house rules, mealtimes, and the other boarders. When Jonas came back down, he found them in the kitchen, where Zuzanna was drinking water from a tin cup while Adelaide sliced bread and cheese. "Jonas, thank you so much for helping Miss Kowalski," Adelaide said, looking up from her work. "I don't know what we would have done if she had wandered around town trying to find this place on her own." "It was no trouble," Jonas said, though he found himself reluctant to leave. There was something about Zuzanna that drew him, a combination of vulnerability and strength that he found compelling. "Miss Kowalski, if you need anything else, the Double R Ranch is about 3 miles north of town. Anyone can give you directions if you need to find me." Zuzanna looked up at him, and again he saw that profound relief in her eyes, mixed now with gratitude. "You are very kind to me today. I do not forget this kindness. Thank you, Mr. McAllister." "Jonas," he corrected gently. "Just Jonas." "Jonas," she repeated, and he liked the way his name sounded in her voice, the subtle shift in pronunciation that made it seem new. He tipped his hat to both women and let himself out, but as he walked back toward the stockyard where he had left his horse, he found his thoughts returning again and again to the woman with the thick accent and the determined eyes. He wondered what had driven her from Poland, what she had left behind, whether she would be able to make a life here in this small Texas town where most people seemed unable or unwilling to listen carefully enough to understand her. That evening at the ranch, over dinner in the bunkhouse, Jonas learned just how difficult Zuzanna's arrival had already become in the eyes of Redemption's residents. "Heard the new teacher came in today," said Tom Brennan, one of the other ranch hands, as he shoveled beans into his mouth. "Billy Parker said she talks so strange nobody can understand a word. His ma is already saying there's no way she can teach the children if she can't even speak proper English." Jonas felt his jaw tighten. "Her English is fine. She has an accent because she's from Poland, but if people would listen instead of just dismissing her, they'd understand her perfectly well." Tom raised his eyebrows. "You met her?" "I helped her find Adelaide's boarding house. Cyrus Webb at the general store was too impatient to even try to understand what she was saying." "Well, that's Cyrus," said Pete Dalton, the oldest of the ranch hands at 43. "But Tom's got a point. If the children can't understand her, how's she going to teach them?" "The children will understand her better than the adults," Jonas said firmly. "Children are good at that. They listen without all the prejudice adults carry around." Samuel Richardson, who had been listening from the head of the table, spoke up then. Jonas is right. I fought alongside men from all over during the war, Germans, Irish, Italians, even a few Poles. The ones who struggled were the ones too stubborn to listen. Communication requires effort on both sides. He looked at Jonas with interest. You thinking of helping this teacher settle in? Jonas met his boss's gaze evenly. Samuel was a fair man, the kind of employer who treated his workers with respect and expected the same in return. I'm thinking the town ought to give her a fair chance before they decide she's no good. Samuel nodded slowly. Agreed, and I reckon you're just the man to make sure that happens. My wife was saying she wants to meet this teacher anyway, see if she needs anything. Maybe you can escort her over here tomorrow, introduce her around proper-like. It was more than a suggestion. Jonas understood, and he was grateful for it. I can do that. The next morning, Jonas rode into town earlier than usual, telling himself he needed to pick up supplies from the general store, but knowing the real reason was to check on Zuzanna. He found the boarding house already bustling with activity. Adelaide was in the front garden, tending her roses, and she smiled when she saw him approach. Come to see our new teacher. She asked with a knowing look. Thought I'd see if she needed anything, Jonas said, dismounting and looping his horse's reins over the fence post. Mrs. Richardson was asking about her, wondering if she'd like to come out to the ranch for a visit. That's kind of Elizabeth, Adelaide said. Miss Kowalski is inside, actually trying to organize her schoolbooks. She's eager to start teaching, but I've told her to take a few days to settle in first. The children can wait a bit longer. Jonas climbed the porch steps and knocked on the doorframe, calling out a greeting. Zuzanna appeared from the front room, and he was struck again by her presence. Today she wore a simple dress of blue cotton, her hair braided and pinned up, and she looked rested despite the previous day's journey. Jonas, she said, and he heard the pleasure in her voice. Good morning. I did not expect to see you again so soon. I wanted to make sure you settled in all right, he said, and Mrs. Richardson, the wife of my boss at the Double R Ranch, asked if you'd like to come out for a visit. She thought you might like to meet some of the ranch families. Several of them have children who will be in your school. Zuzanna's face brightened. Yes, this would be very good. I would like to meet the children, meet the families. It will help me to know them before I begin teaching. I can take you out there now if you'd like, Jonas offered. It's a nice morning for a ride. She hesitated only a moment before nodding. Yes, I would like this. Let me get my bonnet. She disappeared upstairs and returned a few minutes later with a simple straw bonnet tied under her chin and a shawl over her shoulders despite the warmth of the morning. Jonas realized she might not yet be accustomed to the Texas heat, that Poland's climate was likely much different. They walked together down the main street toward the livery stable, where Jonas had left his horse. Along the way, they passed several townspeople, and Jonas noticed the stares, heard the whispers that followed in their wake. At the seamstress shop, Margaret Price stood in her doorway, arms crossed over her ample bosom, watching with disapproval. Is there problem? Zuzanna asked quietly, noticing the attention. No problem, Jonas said firmly. People are just curious. You're new, and new things make people talk. They'll get used to you. But he was not entirely certain of that, and the doubt nagged at him. At the livery, Jonas saddled his horse, a buckskin gelding named Sam, and then turned to Zuzanna. Have you ridden before? She shook her head. In Poland, my family did not have horses. We are city people, not farmers. I have been in wagon, in carriage, but never on horse. Jonas considered this. Well, it's 3 miles to the ranch, too far to walk in this heat. Would you be comfortable riding with me? You can sit behind me and hold on. Sam's very steady. He saw her uncertainty, but also her determination not to be a burden. If you think this is safe, then yes. I trust you. Those last 3 words did something to Jonas's heart, made him want to be worthy of that trust. He swung up into the saddle and then extended his hand down to her. "Put your foot on top of mine in the stirrup, and I'll pull you up." It took 2 attempts, and he felt her hand trembling in his, but finally she managed to settle behind him on Sam's broad back. She held onto his waist tentatively at first, but when he urged the horse forward and Sam began to walk, she gripped tighter. "It is very high up," she said, and he heard the nervousness in her voice mixed with a hint of excitement. "Sam won't let you fall," Jonas assured her. "Just hold on and try to move with him." "That's it, you're doing fine." They rode out of town at a walk, and gradually he felt Zuzanna relax behind him, her hold becoming less desperate and more natural. The morning sun was climbing higher, promising another scorching day, but for now the air was still relatively cool, carrying the scent of sage and mesquite from the surrounding scrubland. "This land is very different from Poland," Zuzanna said after a while, her voice coming close to his ear. "In Bialystok there are many trees, many rivers. Here everything is so open, so dry. It is like Earth is thirsty." "We're coming to the end of summer," Jonas explained. "It's the driest time of year. Come spring, after the winter rains, this land turns green. Wildflowers everywhere, the whole prairie covered in bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush. It's something to see." "I would like to see this," she said softly. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Jonas found himself acutely aware of her presence, the light weight of her against his back, the way her breath moved in and out steadily. He wondered what she thought of this wild country, so different from everything she had known, whether she was brave or desperate or both. "May I ask you something?" Zuzanna said after a while. "Of course." "Yesterday at the store, the man, he did not want to understand me. He made face like this is too difficult, like I am burden to him. But you listened. You understood me even when I know my words are not perfect. Why?" Jonas thought about how to answer that, turning the question over in his mind. "I suppose because I've been the outsider before," he said finally. "Not the same way as you, but after the war I drifted around a lot, felt like I didn't belong anywhere. People can be quick to judge what they don't understand, quick to push away what's different. I guess I don't want to be that kind of person." He felt her nod against his back. "The war, this is the war between North and South, the Civil War." "That's right, I fought for the Union, Tennessee Regiment. I was just 18 when I enlisted." "This was a difficult time," she said, and it was not a question. "The hardest of my life," he admitted. "I lost my father and both my brothers, saw things no person should see. Took me a long time after to figure out how to live again." "I am sorry for your losses," Zuzanna said, and her hand briefly squeezed his arm in sympathy. "In my life also there has been much loss. My mother and father died of fever 3 years ago. My brother, he went to Russia, to Moscow, looking for work. I have not heard from him in 1 year. Maybe he is alive, maybe no, I do not know. I was living with my mother's sister, but her husband, he did not want me there. He said I am burden, another mouth to feed, so I must find my own way." Jonas heard the matter-of-fact tone with which she recounted this, but underneath it he detected the pain of someone who had been unwanted, displaced, forced to leave everything familiar. "I'm sorry," he said. "That must have been hard." "It is life," she said simply. "We must continue, yes, we must find a way to go forward." Coming to America, it was very frightening, but also it was hope. Here they say anyone can make new life, anyone can start again. "That's true," Jonas said. "It's not easy, but it's true. And redemption is a good place to start. Once people get to know you, they'll see what I see." "And what do you see?" she asked, and he heard genuine curiosity in the question. Jonas chose his words carefully. "I see someone brave enough to cross an ocean alone, someone strong enough to leave everything behind and start over. Someone who speaks 3 languages when most people here barely manage one. I see someone worth knowing." He felt her stillness behind him, as if she was absorbing his words, and then she said quietly, "Thank you, Jonas. You give me courage when I am feeling very small." They crested a low rise, and the Double R Ranch spread out before them. The main house was a sprawling structure of whitewashed wood with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Beyond it stood the bunkhouse, the barn, several corrals where horses moved lazily in the morning heat, and further out, the pastures where cattle grazed on the summer dry grass. Jonas guided Sam toward the main house, where he could see Elizabeth Richardson hanging laundry on the line behind the building. She was a slender woman in her early 30s, her blonde hair pinned up under a kerchief, and when she heard the horse approach, she turned and waved. Jonas dismounted and then helped Zuzanna down, steadying her when her legs proved unsteady from the unfamiliar ride. Elizabeth came around the house, wiping her hands on her apron, her face friendly and open. "You must be Miss Kowalski," she said warmly. "I'm so glad Jonas brought you out. Welcome to the Double R." "Thank you very much, Mrs. Richardson," Zuzanna said, and Jonas saw Elizabeth's slight pause as she registered the accent. But to her credit, Elizabeth merely smiled more broadly and gestured toward the house. "Please, come inside out of this heat. I've got coffee on and I baked bread this morning." "You must tell me all about yourself." Inside, the house was cool and comfortable, furnished with pieces that showed both practicality and care. Elizabeth sat them at the kitchen table and poured coffee, setting out fresh bread with butter and honey. As they ate, she asked Zuzanna about her journey, her background, her plans for the school, and Jonas watched with approval as Elizabeth listened carefully, asking for clarification when needed but never with impatience or dismissal. "I think it's wonderful that you've come so far to teach our children," Elizabeth said after Zuzanna had explained her training in Poland, where she had been studying to be a teacher before her parents' death interrupted her plans. "We've needed someone dedicated to education. The last teacher was sweet but quite young, and I think she saw teaching as something to do until marriage rather than as a calling." "For me, teaching is very important," Zuzanna said earnestly. "Children, they are future. What they learn, how they learn to think, this shapes what they become. I want to help them learn not just reading and mathematics, but also to think for themselves, to question, to understand world." Elizabeth's eyes lit up. "Oh, you and I are going to be great friends." "That's exactly how I feel. I've been teaching my own too, but I'm not trained like you are. Sarah is 8 and Thomas is 6. They'll be so excited to have a real school again." "I am excited also to meet them," Zuzanna said. "Mrs. Thornton tells me there are 15 children total." "About that," Elizabeth confirmed, "ranging from 5 to 13 years old. The older boys sometimes have to miss school during busy times on the ranches, but we do our best. The schoolhouse is small but adequate. It's at the edge of town, near the church." They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing more easily as Elizabeth's ear adjusted to Zuzanna's accent. Jonas contributed occasionally, but mostly was content to listen and watch the way Zuzanna's face animated when she talked about teaching, about books, about the ideas she had for her classroom. When it was time to leave, Elizabeth walked them out to where Sam was tied in the shade. "Miss Kowalski, I hope you'll come visit us often, and please, if you need anything at all, you send word. Jonas can bring you out any time." "You are very kind," Zuzanna said. "Thank you for welcoming me. It means very much." On the ride back to town, Zuzanna was more relaxed, her seat behind Jonas more natural. "Mrs. Richardson is nice woman," she said. "She listens like you. She tries to understand." "Elizabeth is special," Jonas agreed. "Her father was a professor back in Boston. She grew up around educated people, people from different places. I think that makes a difference." "I am nervous about others," Zuzanna admitted. "The way people looked at me this morning, the way they whispered, I am afraid they will not want me to teach their children." Jonas wished he could promise her that everything would be fine, but he had seen the looks too, heard the whispers. Some people will need time, he said honestly. But the ones who matter, the ones who care about their children's education, they'll give you a chance. And once they see how good you are, the rest won't matter. I hope you are right, she said quietly. Over the next few days, Jonas found reasons to ride into town more frequently than usual, checking on Zuzanna, introducing her to people he thought might be friendly. He took her to meet the banker, James Fletcher, whose wife had been a teacher before marriage and who welcomed Zuzanna warmly. He introduced her to Martha Chen at the restaurant, who spoke English with her own Chinese accent and who immediately befriended Zuzanna with the kinship of someone who understood the struggle of being foreign. But he also witnessed the resistance. He was there when Margaret Price loudly proclaimed in the general store that she would not send her daughter to be taught by someone who couldn't even speak Christian. He saw the way some of the men dismissed Zuzanna without even speaking to her, making judgments based solely on her appearance and accent. Adelaide Thornton organized a meeting at her boarding house for the families with school-age children, inviting them to meet Zuzanna before the school term began. Jonas attended, standing at the back of the room while Zuzanna stood at the front, nervous but composed, explaining her qualifications and her teaching philosophy. I know my English is not perfect, she said to the gathered parents. I know my accent is difficult for some to understand. But I promise you, I will work hard to communicate clearly with your children. I have been teaching myself English for 5 years. I read English books, English newspapers. I study grammar, vocabulary. And children, they are very good at understanding different ways of speaking. They have open minds, open ears. That's all well and good, said John Price, Margaret's husband. But how are you going to teach our children proper English when you don't speak it proper yourself? Jonas saw Zuzanna flinch at the rudeness of the question, but she answered with dignity. I speak English correctly, Mr. Price. I follow the rules of grammar. I use proper vocabulary. I have accent, yes, but accent is not same as speaking incorrectly. In fact, I think perhaps I can teach your children that there are many ways to speak language. That different does not mean wrong. Well, I think it's an asset. Elizabeth Richardson spoke up from her seat near the front. Miss Kowalski speaks Polish, Russian, German, and English. How many of us can say we speak even 2 languages fluently? That's knowledge she can pass on to our children, an understanding of the wider world. The wider world ain't much use out here, muttered someone from the back, but several other parents nodded in agreement with Elizabeth. The meeting ended without a clear consensus, but at least half the families agreed to send their children when school began. It was not a resounding victory, but it was a start. Afterward, Jonas walked Zuzanna back through the darkening streets to the boarding house. She was quiet, and he could sense her discouragement. You did well in there, he said. You stood up for yourself. But many of them, they do not want me, she said sadly. I see it in their faces. They think I am not good enough. Jonas stopped walking and turned to face her. The last light of sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, and in that soft light, Zuzanna looked both beautiful and heartbreakingly vulnerable. Listen to me, he said firmly. You are more than good enough. You're educated, dedicated, and brave as hell. Anyone who can't see that is a fool, and you're going to prove them wrong. Every single one of them. She looked up at him, her dark eyes searching his face. Why do you believe in me so much? You barely know me. I know enough, Jonas said. I know you didn't give up when that ocean crossing must have been terrifying. I know you didn't give up when you arrived in a strange city where you knew no one. I know you're not giving up now, even though this town is making it hard on you. That tells me everything I need to know. Zuzanna's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she blinked them back and managed a small smile. Thank you, Jonas. I do not know what I would do here without you. You are my friend, yes. Yes, Jonas said without hesitation. I'm your friend. But even as he said it, he knew that what he was beginning to feel went deeper than friendship. He was drawn to her in ways that both exhilarated and frightened him. It had been years since he had allowed himself to care for anyone, years since he had let someone pass the walls he had built after the war. Yet Zuzanna was slipping through those defenses as if they did not exist, with her accent that made him listen harder, her courage that made him want to be braver, her smile that made him believe he could be something more than just a drifting cowboy with a troubled past. The school term began on a Monday morning in late August. Jonas rode into town early, telling himself he just wanted to make sure everything went smoothly, but knowing he needed to see Zuzanna to offer whatever support he could. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building with a bell tower, freshly whitewashed for the new term. When Jonas arrived, Zuzanna was already there, arranging books on the teacher's desk at the front of the room. She wore a dark green dress that he had not seen before, her hair pinned up severely, and she looked both professional and nervous. "Good morning," he said from the doorway, and she spun around, her face breaking into a smile when she saw him. "Jonas, good morning. You did not have to come." "Wanted to," he said simply, stepping inside. The room smelled of chalk dust and wood polish. Rows of desks faced the front, a blackboard hung on the wall behind the teacher's desk, and maps of the United States and the world were tacked up beside it. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous," she admitted, "but also excited. I have been waiting for this, preparing. Now it is time." Outside, they could hear the sounds of children arriving, voices high and excited after the long summer. Through the window, Jonas saw parents dropping off their children, some lingering to watch, others leaving quickly. He recognized Elizabeth Richardson's two, Sarah and Thomas, along with about 10 other children of varying ages. Not 15. Several families had chosen to keep their children home rather than send them to be taught by the foreign teacher. Zuzanna saw it too, and he watched her square her shoulders and lift her chin. "The ones who are here, they are the ones who want to learn. This is what matters." The children began filing in, taking seats with the shyness and excitement of a first day. They stared at Zuzanna with open curiosity, and Jonas could see them straining to hear when she greeted them. "Good morning, children. My name is Miss Kowalski. I am your new teacher." He heard the collective surprise as they registered her accent, saw some of the children exchange glances. But then Sarah Richardson raised her hand, and when Zuzanna nodded at her, she said clearly, "Good morning, Miss Kowalski. My mama says you came from Poland. Where is Poland?" Zuzanna's face lit up. She turned to the world map on the wall and pointed to a spot in Europe. "Poland is here, between Germany and Russia. It is very far away across the Atlantic Ocean. I traveled for many weeks to come to America, to come to Texas, to come here to teach you." "Why did you come so far?" asked a boy Jonas recognized as the blacksmith's son, David Henderson. "Because in America there are opportunities," Zuzanna said, "and because I wanted to teach. Teaching is what I love to do. I want to help you learn, help you discover new things about the world." The children seemed to accept this, and gradually, as Zuzanna began the day's lessons, Jonas saw them relax into the rhythm of her voice. She was a natural teacher, he realized, patient but firm, making the lessons interesting by connecting them to things the children already knew. When she taught geography, she compared the Texas landscape to the plains of Poland. When she taught mathematics, she used examples from ranch life, cattle counts, and fence measurements. And when she taught reading, she chose stories that were engaging, acting out parts with enthusiasm that made the children laugh. Jonas finally left after an hour, satisfied that she would be fine, but he found himself unable to concentrate on his work at the ranch that day. His mind kept returning to the schoolhouse, to the image of Zuzanna at the front of the room, so determined and capable. That evening, he rode back into town and found her sitting on the porch of the boarding house, looking exhausted but pleased. When she saw him, she stood up with a smile. "How did it go?" he asked, tying Sam to the post and joining her on the porch. "It went well," she said, and he could hear the relief in her voice. "The children, they are wonderful, so curious, so eager. Some of them asked me to repeat things, but they were not mean about it. They truly wanted to understand, and by the end of the day, already they were understanding me better." "I told you," Jonas said, sitting down beside her. "Children are better at this than adults." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the town settle into evening. People walked past on their way home from work, horses and wagons kicked up dust on the main street, and somewhere a dog barked. "Jonas," Zuzanna said after a while, "may I ask you something personal?" "Of course. You have been so kind to me, so helpful. You spend much time helping me when you have your own work, your own life. Why? What do you want from me?" The question was direct, almost blunt, and Jonas realized she was asking because in her experience, kindness often came with a price. He considered how to answer, knowing that what he said now mattered. "I don't want anything from you," he said carefully. "At first, I helped because it seemed like the right thing to do. You needed help and I was there. But now I keep coming back because I enjoy your company. I like talking with you. I like hearing about your life, your thoughts. I like the way you see things, the way you're brave even when you're scared. I guess what I'm saying is, I'd like to keep being your friend. And if someday that could become something more, I'd like that too. But I'm not going to push. You've got enough to deal with without me complicating things." Zuzanna was quiet for a long moment, her eyes on her hands folded in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "In Poland, before I left, there was a man who wanted to marry me. He was older, friend of my uncle. My uncle wanted this marriage because then I would not be his burden anymore. But this man, he did not care about me, about what I wanted. He wanted wife to cook and clean and give him children. He did not care that I wanted to teach, that I had dreams. When I said no, my uncle was very angry. This is part of why I had to leave." Jonas felt anger rise in his chest at the thought of Zuzanna being treated as a burden, as a commodity. "I'm sorry that happened to you. I tell you this because I want you to understand," Zuzanna continued. "I came to America to be free, to make my own choices. I do not want to be someone's burden, someone's duty. But you, Jonas, you are not like that man. You listen to me. You see me as person, not just as woman who needs husband. This is why I trust you." "You can trust me," Jonas said quietly. "I promise you that." She looked up at him then, and in her eyes he saw something shift, some wall coming down. "I enjoy your company also, very much. When you come to visit, my heart, it feels lighter. I think perhaps this could become something more, as you say, but I need time. I need to find my feet here first to establish myself." "You understand?" "I understand," Jonas said and meant it. "I'm not going anywhere." She smiled then and reached out to briefly touch his hand. "Thank you for being patient with me, for being you." As the weeks passed, Jonas and Zuzanna fell into a comfortable rhythm. He would ride into town several evenings a week after work, and they would walk together through the streets or sit on Adelaide's porch and talk. Zuzanna told him about her childhood in Bialystok, about her parents who had run a small bookshop, about the books she had read growing up that had shaped her understanding of the world. Jonas told her about his own childhood on a small farm in Tennessee, about his father who had been a circuit preacher, about his mother who had sung while she worked. He told her about the war, about the things he had done and seen, about the long years afterward when he could not seem to find peace anywhere. "But you found it here," Zuzanna said one evening as they walked past the church at the edge of town, "in redemption." "I found something here," Jonas agreed. "Work that matters, people I respect." Samuel and Elizabeth have been good to me. This town gave me a place when I needed one. And now, she asked, glancing up at him. Now I think I've found something more, he said, holding her gaze. Something I didn't even know I was looking for. The school continued to go well. The children adored Zuzanna, and their parents, seeing the progress their children were making, began to soften. Even John Price grudgingly admitted that his daughter was learning more from Miss Kowalski than she had from the previous teacher. One by one, the families who had kept their children home began sending them to school, until Zuzanna had nearly 20 students, more than anticipated. But not everyone in town was pleased. Margaret Price remained hostile, spreading rumors that Zuzanna was teaching the children foreign ideas, that she was corrupting them with European thinking. A few of the men at the saloon made crude jokes about the foreign schoolteacher, wondering loudly what it would take to Americanize her properly. Jonas heard these comments one evening when he stopped in for a drink after work, and he felt his temper flare. He set his glass down hard on the bar and turned to face the men who had been talking. "You've got something to say about Miss Kowalski, you say it to my face," he said, his voice cold. The men, 3 ranch hands from a spread south of town, looked at him with surprise and then amusement. "Easy there, McAllister," one of them said. "We're just having a little fun, no harm meant." "It's harmful to spread lies and disrespect a woman who's done nothing but work hard and treat this town with kindness," Jonas said. "Miss Kowalski is a better teacher than this town deserves, and if you can't see that, you're bigger fools than I thought." One of the men stood up, his face reddening. "You defending her because you're sweet on her. Everyone's noticed you sniffing around the boarding house like a dog in heat." Jonas's fist connected with the man's jaw before he fully registered the decision to throw the punch. The man went down hard and his companions jumped to their feet, but before the situation could escalate further, Samuel Richardson stepped between them. "That's enough," Samuel said firmly. He had come into the saloon behind Jonas and had clearly heard the exchange. "Jonas, outside, now. The rest of you, sit down and shut up unless you want me to have words with your boss about the kind of men he's employing." Outside, Samuel turned to Jonas with a stern expression. "That was foolish. You know better than to start fights in town." "They were disrespecting Zuzanna," Jonas said, his anger still hot. "I'm not going to stand by and let them talk about her like that." Samuel's expression softened slightly. "I understand, and I don't blame you for wanting to defend her, but you've got to be smarter about it. Fighting just gives those idiots ammunition, makes them think they're right about whatever garbage they're spewing." Jonas took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "You're right. I know you're right, I just hate the way some people in this town treat her. She works so hard and they act like she's some kind of threat." "People fear what they don't understand," Samuel said. "And some people will never get past that fear. But the ones who matter are starting to come around. Elizabeth tells me the school is thriving, that's what matters." "I know," Jonas said. "I just wish it was easier for her." Samuel studied him for a moment. "You're in love with her." It was not a question, and Jonas did not try to deny it. "Yes. Does she know?" "I think so. We've talked about it. She's asked me to be patient while she gets settled." "That's wise of her," Samuel said, "and good of you to respect that. Just don't go throwing punches every time some fool says something stupid, or you'll spend half your life in brawls." Jonas managed a rueful smile. "I'll try to remember that." When he went to see Zuzanna the next evening, he was planning not to mention the incident at the saloon, but Adelaide Thornton met him at the door with a knowing look. "You might want to put a cold compress on that hand before she sees it," Adelaide said dryly. "I heard you defended her honor last night." Jonas looked down at his right hand where the knuckles were swollen and bruised. News travels fast. Always does in a small town. She's in the back garden. Jonas found Zuzanna sitting on the bench under the cottonwood tree, reading a book by the fading light. When she heard his footsteps, she looked up and smiled, but her expression changed to concern when she saw his hand. "What happened?" she asked, standing up and reaching for his hand to examine it. "It's nothing," Jonas said, "just a misunderstanding at the saloon." "Jonas," she looked up at him, her eyes serious, "tell me the truth." So he told her, watching her face as he explained what the men had been saying, why he had lost his temper. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, still holding his injured hand gently in both of hers. "You should not fight because of me," she said finally. "I do not want you to be hurt because of my problems." "They're not just your problems," Jonas said, "and I couldn't stand by and let them talk about you that way." "But this is exactly what I was afraid of," Zuzanna said, her voice pained. "That by being here I would cause trouble, that people would resent me." "Zuzanna, listen to me." Jonas gently tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "You are not causing trouble. Ignorant people cause trouble. You're just trying to live your life and do your job. You have every right to be here and you have nothing to apologize for." "But you got hurt," she whispered. "A few bruised knuckles aren't going to kill me. I've had worse." "What would hurt me is if you let these people make you doubt yourself, make you think you don't belong here." Zuzanna searched his face, and then suddenly she stepped closer and wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest. Jonas stood very still for a moment, surprised, and then his arms came up to hold her, one hand settling at her back, the other cradling her head. They stood like that for a long moment, and Jonas became aware of everything about her, the way she fit against him, the scent of lavender soap in her hair, the warmth of her body. He felt her shoulders shake slightly and realized she was crying silently. "I am so tired," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "So tired of being strong all the time, of proving myself, of feeling like I do not belong anywhere. And then you are here, and you make me feel like maybe I can belong, like maybe I am not alone." "You're not alone," Jonas said softly, tightening his arms around her. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." She pulled back slightly to look up at him, tears streaking her cheeks. "I think I am falling in love with you," she said, the words coming out with a kind of desperate honesty. "I did not want to. I wanted to be independent, to rely only on myself, but I cannot help it. You have been so kind, so patient. You see me, really see me, when most people only see my accent, my foreignness." Jonas felt his heart expand in his chest, felt something click into place that had been misaligned for years. "I'm in love with you too," he said. "I have been for weeks. I just didn't want to push you before you were ready." "I am ready," Zuzanna said. "I am afraid, but I am ready." Jonas cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "Can I kiss you?" She nodded, and he lowered his head slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she rose to meet him. Their lips met gently at first, tentative, but then with growing certainty. Zuzanna's hands fisted in his shirt, and Jonas pulled her closer, deepening the kiss until they were both breathless. When they finally broke apart, Zuzanna was smiling despite her tears. "That was my first kiss," she admitted shyly. "Really?" Jonas was both honored and surprised. "In Poland, unmarried women do not kiss men, it is not proper. But here in America, I am allowed to make my own choices, and I choose you." "I'm glad you choose me," Jonas said, pressing his forehead against hers, "because I choose you too, completely." They sat down together on the bench, Zuzanna tucked against Jonas's side, his arm around her shoulders. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars began to appear, they talked about the future, about what it might look like for them. "I want to keep teaching," Zuzanna said. "This is important to me. I do not want to be a woman who gives up her work when she marries." "I wouldn't want you to," Jonas assured her. "I fell in love with you partly because of your passion for teaching. I wouldn't try to take that away. And you want to stay at the ranch. You do not have dreams of your own land." Jonas considered this. He had never really thought about owning land, about putting down roots that deep. But with Zuzanna beside him, suddenly it seemed possible, even desirable. I like working for Samuel, but yes, someday I'd like to have my own place. Nothing huge, but enough for some horses, maybe a small herd of cattle, enough to support a family. A family, Zuzanna repeated softly. I have not let myself think about family since my parents died, but now with you I can imagine it. Children of our own, a home we build together. Is that what you want? Jonas asked. Yes, she said simply. Not immediately. I want to teach for a while longer, want us to save money to be ready. But yes, someday I want that with you. They sat in the gathering darkness, making plans and dreaming together, and Jonas felt a peace settle over him that he had not felt in years. The war had taken so much from him, had left him hollow and drifting, but Zuzanna was filling that hollow place with hope and purpose. Over the following months, Jonas and Zuzanna's relationship deepened and became public. They were seen together regularly, and while some in town continued to disapprove, most people eventually accepted that the schoolteacher and the cowboy were courting. Adelaide Thornton chaperoned them cheerfully, allowing Jonas to visit in the evenings and occasionally leaving them alone on the porch, trusting them to behave with propriety. The school year progressed beautifully. Zuzanna's students were learning rapidly, and even the most skeptical parents had to admit that their children were receiving an excellent education. The children themselves were learning more than just academics from Zuzanna. They were learning about tolerance, about seeing past differences, about the value of hard work and perseverance. In November, Jonas took Zuzanna to the ranch for Thanksgiving dinner. Samuel and Elizabeth had invited several of the ranch families, and it was a warm, boisterous gathering. Zuzanna was nervous at first, but she was welcomed with genuine warmth, especially by Elizabeth, who treated her like a younger sister. During the meal, Samuel stood to say grace and to express his thanks for the year's blessings. "And we're thankful for new friends," he said, smiling at Zuzanna. "People who remind us that America is strongest when we welcome those who come here seeking a better life, seeking freedom and opportunity. Miss Kowalski, we're glad you're here." The room erupted in agreement, and Zuzanna's eyes filled with tears as she looked around at the friendly faces. Later, she told Jonas it was the first time since leaving Poland that she truly felt like she belonged somewhere. As winter approached, Jonas began saving money in earnest, planning for the future he and Zuzanna had discussed. He talked to Samuel about eventually buying a parcel of land adjacent to the Double R, a section that Samuel was willing to sell at a fair price. It would take time to save enough, but it was a start. In December, on Christmas Eve, Jonas took Zuzanna to the small church in Redemption for the candlelight service. The church was full, the community gathered together despite their differences. As they sang carols, Jonas held Zuzanna's hand, feeling the rightness of her beside him. After the service, as they walked back to the boarding house through the cold night air, Jonas stopped under the bare branches of an oak tree on the main street. Snow had begun to fall, soft flakes drifting down in the lamplight. "Zuzanna," he said, taking both her hands in his, "I know we talked about waiting, about taking our time. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to know that I mean it with everything I am." She looked up at him, her breath forming clouds in the cold air, her eyes wide and knowing. "I want to marry you," Jonas said. "I want to build a life with you, a home with you. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're beside me and go to sleep every night the same way. I know I'm just a cowboy without much to offer right now, but I promise I will work hard to give you a good life. I'll support your teaching for as long as you want to teach. I'll be patient when you want to be patient, and I'll be there when you need me. Will you marry me?" Zuzanna was crying, but she was also smiling, and she nodded before she spoke. "Yes. Yes, Jonas, I will marry you. You say you do not have much to offer, but you give me everything that matters. You give me respect, patience, understanding. You give me love that makes me feel safe and cherished. Yes, I will marry you." Jonas pulled her into his arms and kissed her there under the oak tree in the falling snow, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both laughing with joy. They were married in February of 1879, in the same small church where Jonas had proposed. The whole town turned out for the wedding, even those who had initially been hostile to Zuzanna's presence. She wore a simple white dress that Elizabeth and Adelaide had helped her make, with lace at the collar and sleeves. Her dark hair was pinned up with wildflowers that Martha Chen had somehow managed to procure despite the winter season. Jonas wore his best suit, brushed and pressed, and when he saw Zuzanna walking down the aisle toward him, he felt his throat tighten with emotion. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was his. This brave, brilliant woman had chosen him, had agreed to share her life with him. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, conducted by the circuit preacher who visited Redemption once a month. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and told Jonas he could kiss his bride, the kiss was chaste but full of promise. The reception was held at the boarding house, which Adelaide had offered gladly. There was food and music and dancing, and Jonas danced with his wife under the watchful eyes of their community. Zuzanna laughed as he spun her around, her accent as thick as ever, but now no one seemed to notice or care. She had become one of them through persistence and grace, and they celebrated her happiness as their own. That night, Jonas and Zuzanna began their married life in a room at the boarding house that Adelaide had prepared specially for them. It would be their home until they could afford their own place, and Adelaide had made it clear they were welcome to stay as long as they needed. Alone together for the first time as husband and wife, Jonas was suddenly nervous. Zuzanna saw it and smiled, reaching up to touch his face. "I am nervous too," she admitted, "but I trust you." "I know you will be gentle with me," Jonas kissed her softly. "Always, we don't have to do anything you're not ready for." But Zuzanna shook her head. "I am ready. I want to be your wife in every way." What followed was tender and sweet, two people learning each other with care and love. Jonas was patient, attentive to Zuzanna's responses, and afterward, as they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Zuzanna curled against his side. Both of them were smiling. "That was not so frightening," Zuzanna said with a soft laugh. "In Poland, the women, they make it sound like terrible duty, but with you it was beautiful." Jonas kissed the top of her head. "It will get even better as we learn each other more, but yes, it was beautiful. You're beautiful." Zuzanna continued teaching through the spring, though now she was Mrs. McAllister instead of Miss Kowalski. Some traditionalists grumbled that a married woman should not be working, but the school board, which included Samuel Richardson and James Fletcher, supported her fully, and most parents were too pleased with their children's progress to complain. Jonas continued working at the Double R, but in his spare time, he began preparing the land he planned to buy from Samuel. He rode out to the parcel on Sundays, Zuzanna sometimes accompanying him, and they would walk the property together, planning where they would build their house, where they would put the barn, which areas would be best for pasture. "It is good land," Zuzanna said one warm Sunday in April, standing on a rise that overlooked the property. "I can see our future here, our children playing in that meadow, horses in the corral. A garden near the house where I can grow vegetables and flowers." "How many children are you envisioning?" Jonas asked with amusement. Zuzanna considered. 3, 4. "I come from small family, and it was lonely after my brother left. I want our children to have siblings, to have family around them always." 3 or 4 sounds good, Jonas agreed, putting his arm around her waist. "Though we should probably start with 1 and see how it goes." That summer, at the end of the school term, Zuzanna announced to Jonas that she thought she might be pregnant. They had been married 5 months, and while they had not been trying to prevent a pregnancy, they had not been actively trying for one either. Jonas was overjoyed but also anxious. "Are you sure?" "Have you seen a doctor?" "Not yet," Zuzanna admitted. "But I know my body, I am late and I feel different. We will go to the doctor this week to confirm." The doctor did confirm it, announcing that Zuzanna was about 2 months along and should expect the baby in late January or early February. Both Jonas and Zuzanna were elated, though Zuzanna was also slightly anxious about how pregnancy and motherhood would affect her teaching. "I want to teach through the fall," she told Jonas. "The children should not lose their education because I am having a baby. Perhaps I can find someone to take over in the new year when the baby is close." But the school board surprised them both by offering a solution. Elizabeth Richardson agreed to take over teaching duties in January and continue through the spring, allowing Zuzanna time to recover and care for the new baby. Then, if Zuzanna wished, she could return to teaching the following fall while Elizabeth cared for the baby along with her own children. "We take care of our own," Elizabeth said when she presented the plan, "and you're one of us now, Zuzanna. We'll make this work." The generosity brought tears to Zuzanna's eyes. "I do not know how to thank you." "You already have," Elizabeth said warmly. "You've taught my children more in 1 year than they learned in 2 years before. You've brought something special to this town. We're not going to let you go easily." Zuzanna did teach through the fall, her pregnancy progressing normally. The children were excited about their teacher having a baby, and some of the older girls shyly asked her questions about what it was like, about whether she was frightened. Zuzanna answered honestly but appropriately, teaching them that having a baby was natural and beautiful, if also challenging. In November, Jonas finalized the purchase of the land from Samuel, and he began building their house with help from the other ranch hands and several men from town. It was a modest house, just 4 rooms to start, but it was solidly built and situated on the prettiest part of the property, with a view of the hills to the west. They moved into the house in December, just before Christmas. Zuzanna was 7 months pregnant and moved carefully, but she insisted on helping Jonas arrange their few pieces of furniture, on hanging curtains she had sewn, on making the house a home. "It is perfect," she said, standing in the main room and looking around with satisfaction. "Our house, our home. I never thought when I left Poland that I would find this. A home, a husband who loves me, a community that accepts me. It is more than I dreamed." "You deserve all of it," Jonas said, coming to stand beside her and placing his hand gently on her swollen belly. "And in a few weeks, we'll have our first child here, our family." Their son was born on a cold February night in 1880, after a labor that lasted 12 hours and left Zuzanna exhausted but triumphant. Adelaide Thornton served as midwife, having delivered half the babies in Redemption over the past 15 years, and she pronounced both mother and baby healthy. Jonas held his son for the first time in the early hours of the morning, overwhelmed by the tiny, perfect person in his arms. He had dark hair like Zuzanna, and when he opened his eyes, they were blue like Jonas's. "What shall we name him?" Jonas asked softly, looking up at Zuzanna, who was watching them from the bed with tired but joyful eyes. "I would like to name him after your father," Zuzanna said. "You have told me about him, about how he was a good man. I want our son to have that legacy." Jonas felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Thomas, then. Thomas James McAllister." "Thomas," Zuzanna repeated, smiling. "Tommy, I like this very much." The first months of Tommy's life were challenging, as all new parents find them to be, but they were also filled with joy. Jonas had never known he could love someone so fiercely, so immediately. He would wake in the night to help Zuzanna with feedings, would walk the floor with Tommy when he was fussy, would sit and simply watch his son sleep, amazed that this person existed because of him and Zuzanna. Zuzanna proved to be a natural mother, though she confessed to Jonas that she often felt uncertain, worried she was doing things wrong. "In Poland, I would have my mother to teach me," she said wistfully one night as she nursed Tommy. "I would have aunts and cousins around to help. Here it is just us." "Not just us," Jonas reminded her. "We have Adelaide, Elizabeth, Martha. They're your family now, chosen family, and you're doing wonderfully. Look at him, how healthy and happy he is. That's because of you." In the fall, Zuzanna did return to teaching as planned. Elizabeth would bring her children and Tommy to the schoolhouse, and the baby would sleep in a cradle in the corner while Zuzanna taught. When Tommy needed to nurse, Zuzanna would take a brief break and the older students would help the younger ones with their lessons. It was unconventional, but it worked. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Jonas worked hard on their ranch, gradually building up a small herd of cattle and acquiring a few good horses. Zuzanna taught during the school year and spent her summers with Tommy, teaching him to walk, to talk, to explore the world around him. Their house was small but filled with love and laughter. In 1882, Zuzanna gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Clara Adelaide, after Adelaide Thornton, who had become like a mother to Zuzanna. Clara had Zuzanna's dark eyes and Jonas's temperament, calm and observant even as an infant. Tommy, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, insisting on helping with everything. Zuzanna found herself managing 2 children and teaching, and while it was exhausting, she told Jonas she had never been happier. "Sometimes I think about my life in Poland," she said one evening as they sat on their porch, watching Tommy chase fireflies in the yard while Clara slept in her cradle beside them. "How unhappy I was, how trapped I felt, and then I think about everything that had to happen to bring me here. My parents dying, my uncle rejecting me, the fear and bravery it took to cross the ocean. All of that brought me to you, to this life. I would not change any of it." "I think about that too," Jonas admitted, "about how the war broke me, about how I drifted for years. If any of it had been different, I might not have been here when you arrived, we might never have met." "But we did meet," Zuzanna said, reaching over to take his hand, "and we listened to each other. That is what made the difference. You listened harder than anyone else." Over the years, their family continued to grow. In 1884, they welcomed another son, Samuel, named after Samuel Richardson. In 1887, another daughter, Elizabeth, named after Elizabeth Richardson. Their house grew too, as Jonas added rooms to accommodate their expanding family. The ranch prospered modestly, never making them wealthy but providing a comfortable living. Jonas had a gift for training horses, and people came from miles around to buy horses he had trained. Zuzanna taught for 15 years before finally retiring to focus on their children and the ranch, though she never lost her love of education and spent hours teaching her own children, instilling in them the same love of learning she had brought from Poland. Tommy grew into a serious young man who shared his father's way with horses and his mother's love of books. He would eventually take over the ranch, expanding it into one of the most successful in the county. Clara became a teacher herself, following in her mother's footsteps and eventually taking over the school in Redemption. Samuel became a lawyer, moving to San Antonio but returning home frequently to visit. Elizabeth married a doctor and stayed in Redemption, becoming a pillar of the community like her mother before her. As Jonas and Zuzanna grew older, they would often sit together on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the hills, holding hands as they had since the beginning. Zuzanna's accent never faded, remaining as thick as the day she arrived in Redemption, but no one noticed anymore. She was simply Mrs. McAllister, the woman who had taught a generation of Redemption's children, the woman who had shown them that different did not mean wrong. Do you ever regret it? Jonas asked her one evening when they were both in their 60s, their children grown with families of their own. Leaving Poland, coming here to this wild place. Zuzanna looked at him with surprise. Regret? No, never. This wild place gave me everything I have. It gave me you. How could I regret that? I just want to make sure you've been happy, Jonas said. That I've given you a good life. Jonas McAllister, Zuzanna said firmly, squeezing his hand. You have given me the best life, a life with love, with purpose, with family. You gave me a home when I had none. You listened when no one else would. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. I have been happy every day with you. Jonas raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. I'm the one who was blessed. You made me believe in the future again, made me want to build something lasting. You gave me a family, a home, a reason to wake up every morning grateful to be alive. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as their grandson, Tommy's oldest boy, rode past on one of the horses, whooping with joy. In the distance, they could see Clara's children playing near the creek, and hear Elizabeth's laughter from inside the house where she was helping Zuzanna prepare dinner for the family gathering they were hosting that weekend. We built something good, Zuzanna said softly. Something that will last long after we are gone, our children, their children, this land, the memory of what we created together. The best thing I ever built, Jonas agreed. They lived many more good years together, seeing their grandchildren grow and eventually welcoming great-grandchildren. Zuzanna passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1920, at the age of 68, surrounded by her family. Jonas followed her just 6 months later, as if unable to exist in a world without her. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch, under an oak tree that Jonas had planted the year they moved into their house. Their headstone was simple, bearing their names and dates, and below that, a phrase that Clara had suggested. They listened to each other and heard love. The town of Redemption never forgot Zuzanna Kowalski McAllister, the teacher who had come from across the ocean and changed their community forever. For generations, children learned not just reading and mathematics, but also tolerance and the value of listening carefully to those who speak differently, think differently, live differently. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew across the prairie and rustled through the grass on that hillside where Jonas and Zuzanna rested together, some people swore they could hear the echo of an accent, thick and musical, and the low murmur of a cowboy's voice responding, patient and kind, proving that some love stories transcend time, built on the simple but profound act of truly listening to another human being. The ranch that Jonas and Zuzanna built together continued to thrive for generations, passed down through their children and grandchildren, each generation adding to the legacy while maintaining the values that Jonas and Zuzanna had instilled. The house was expanded and modernized over the years, but the original 4 rooms that Jonas built with his own hands were preserved, treated as a sacred space where family would gather to remember their ancestors. In the town of Redemption, the schoolhouse where Zuzanna taught for so many years was eventually replaced by a larger building, but a plaque was placed on the site commemorating her contributions to the community's education. Every year on the anniversary of her arrival in Redemption, the school would hold a special assembly where children would learn about the brave woman from Poland who crossed an ocean to teach them, who persevered despite prejudice, who proved that determination and grace could overcome any obstacle. Tommy, true to his father's training, became renowned throughout Texas for his ability to train horses. People said he had inherited not just his father's skill, but also his father's patience, his willingness to listen to what the horses were trying to tell him. He married a schoolteacher, following the example of his parents' happy marriage, and together they raised 5 children on the ranch, teaching them the value of hard work, education, and treating all people with respect regardless of where they came from or how they spoke. Clara, who had loved learning from the moment she could understand words, taught in the Redemption School for 40 years, retiring only when age made it too difficult to manage the increasingly large classes. She never married, dedicating her life to education as her mother had before her marriage. Her students remembered her as demanding but fair, someone who pushed them to think critically and question assumptions, someone who would not tolerate prejudice or cruelty in her classroom. She lived in the old boarding house, which she had inherited from Adelaide Thornton, and turned it into a place where traveling teachers could stay, ensuring that even the smallest communities in the area had access to education. Samuel, with his sharp mind and gift for oratory, became a prominent lawyer in San Antonio, arguing cases all the way to the Texas Supreme Court. He specialized in defending immigrants and those who could not afford expensive legal representation, driven by the memory of his mother's struggles when she first arrived in America. He would tell people that he learned justice from his mother's example, from watching her treat every student equally regardless of their background, from seeing her refuse to give up even when the odds seemed impossible. Elizabeth, the youngest, stayed closest to home. She married Dr. Robert Chen, the son of Martha Chen, who had befriended Zuzanna during her first difficult days in Redemption. Together, they provided medical care to the community for decades, treating everyone from wealthy ranchers to the poorest families with the same dedication and skill. Elizabeth often said that she learned compassion from her mother, from watching Zuzanna extend kindness to everyone she met, even those who had initially treated her poorly. The four McAllister children remained close throughout their lives, gathering regularly at the family ranch for holidays and celebrations. They would sit on the same porch where their parents had spent countless evenings, sharing stories about Jonas and Zuzanna, keeping their memory alive for the next generation. One of the stories they told most often was about the Christmas of 1895, when Zuzanna organized a special program at the school where children from immigrant families were invited to share their cultures with the community. There had been resistance at first from some of the older families, but Zuzanna persisted, arguing that understanding led to compassion, that exposure to different traditions enriched everyone. The program was a tremendous success. Children sang songs in German, Italian, Spanish, Polish, and Chinese. They shared foods from their cultures, taught their classmates words in their languages, explained traditions that their families brought from their homelands. By the end of the evening, even the most skeptical attendees had to admit that Redemption was richer for its diversity, not threatened by it. Jonas had stood at the back of the schoolhouse that evening, watching Zuzanna coordinate the chaos of dozens of children and their nervous parents, and he felt his heart swell with pride and love. This was what she had dreamed of, what she had worked toward. Not just teaching children to read and write, but teaching them to see the humanity in everyone, to celebrate difference rather than fear it. After everyone had left that night, Jonas had helped Zuzanna clean up the schoolhouse, and when they were alone, he pulled her into his arms. "I am so proud of you," he said. Tonight was extraordinary. Zuzanna had tears in her eyes. "It is what I wished for from the beginning, to help people understand that we are all human, all worthy of respect. That my accent, or someone else's language, or different traditions do not make us less. Tonight, I think maybe people finally understood." "They understood because you never gave up on them," Jonas said. "You could have left when they treated you badly at first. You could have gone to a city where there were more immigrants, where you would have fit in more easily. But you stayed, and you kept trying, and eventually they had to see what I saw from the beginning, that you're exceptional." The memory of that night, and hundreds of others like it, sustained Jonas during the dark months after Zuzanna's death. He missed her with an intensity that surprised him, even though they had been married for over 40 years. He missed her voice, her accent that had never faded, her laughter, her strong opinions about everything from politics to the proper way to make bread. He missed the way she would reach for his hand without thinking, the way she fit perfectly against his side when they sat together, the way she looked at him like he was the most important person in her world. His children worried about him, about the way he seemed to fade after Zuzanna died. Tommy tried to convince him to move into the main house, to let them take care of him, but Jonas refused. "I'm staying in our house," he said firmly. "The house I built for her, where we raised you children, where every corner holds a memory of her. I'm not leaving it." But the truth was, Jonas did not want to live in a world without Zuzanna. He had tried, for 6 months he had tried, but everything felt hollow and pointless. He was 71 years old, his body worn from a lifetime of hard work, and he was tired. So very tired. The night before he died, Jonas had a dream. He was young again, 26 years old, standing in front of the general store in Redemption on a blistering July afternoon. He watched as the stagecoach pulled up, watched as Zuzanna descended, dusty and exhausted but determined. He watched as she walked into the store, heard her voice for the first time asking about the boarding house. But in the dream, he moved faster than he had in reality. He was there before she even finished her question, before Cyrus Webb could respond with impatience and dismissal. "I can help you," Dream Jonas said, and when Zuzanna turned to look at him, she was young again too, her dark eyes uncertain but hopeful. "You understand me?" she asked. "I understand you," he said. "And I'm going to make sure everyone else understands you too. Welcome to Redemption. Welcome home." Dream Zuzanna smiled, that transformative smile that had changed his life so many years ago, and she reached out to take his hand. "I think I have been looking for you my whole life," she said. "I know I've been looking for you," Jonas replied. Jonas woke from the dream feeling peaceful, more peaceful than he had felt since Zuzanna died. He got out of bed slowly, his joints aching with age, and walked through the house, touching things that she had touched, remembering. The kitchen table where they had shared thousands of meals. The rocking chair where she had nursed their babies. The bookshelf filled with her favorite books, spines worn from repeated reading. He went outside and sat on the porch, watching the sun rise over the hills. It was spring, Zuzanna's favorite season, and wildflowers were blooming across the prairie, just as she had promised him they would that first year. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of new growth and possibility. This was a good place, Jonas thought. A good place to have lived, to have loved, to have built a life. He and Zuzanna had taken this wild land and made it home, had raised children who would carry forward their values, had touched the lives of hundreds of people through Zuzanna's teaching and their example. Tommy found him that afternoon, still sitting on the porch, looking peaceful. Jonas had died sometime in the late morning, doctors later said, probably his heart simply giving out. But Tommy swore that his father had been smiling, that he looked more content than he had in months. At Jonas's funeral, the church was packed. All 4 of his children spoke, sharing memories and lessons learned. But it was Clara who perhaps said it best. "My father," she said, her voice steady despite her tears, "was a man who knew how to listen. In a world where people talked over each other, where they dismissed what they didn't immediately understand, my father listened harder. That's how he and my mother found each other." She spoke with an accent that confused many people, but my father listened past the accent to hear her heart, her mind, her spirit. And in doing so, he found the love of his life and built a family and a legacy that will endure for generations. She paused, looking around at the crowd. "My mother taught us to value education, to think critically, to treat all people with respect. But my father taught us something equally important. He taught us to listen, really listen to others. Not just to wait for our turn to talk, but to truly hear what others are saying, what they need, who they are." In a world that seems to be getting louder and more divided, that lesson is more important than ever. After the funeral, Jonas was buried next to Zuzanna on the hillside under the oak tree. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren stood around the grave, a testament to the love story that had begun with a simple act of listening, of choosing to understand rather than to dismiss. In the years that followed, the McAllister Ranch continued to be a gathering place for the extended family. The original house became a kind of museum, preserved exactly as Jonas and Zuzanna had left it, a place where descendants could come to connect with their history, to remember where they came from. On the mantelpiece in the main room was a photograph from 1910, one of the few taken of Jonas and Zuzanna together. They sat on the porch, Jonas in his worn work clothes, Zuzanna in a simple dress, their hands clasped between them. Both were looking at each other rather than at the camera, and the love in their expressions was so evident that it made even strangers who saw the photograph smile. Beside the photograph was a frame containing a letter that Zuzanna had written to Jonas on their 25th wedding anniversary, a letter that Jonas had saved and read repeatedly after her death. In her distinctive handwriting, with its European flourishes, she had written, "My dearest Jonas, 25 years ago today you made me your wife, and I became the luckiest woman in the world. I think about that July day when I arrived in Redemption, so frightened and alone, speaking English that no one wanted to understand. And then there was you. You listened to me when no one else would. You heard me when I was invisible to everyone else. You chose to understand rather than to dismiss. That choice changed my life, changed our lives, created this beautiful family and home we have built together. I love you more today than I did on our wedding day, though I did not think that was possible. Thank you for listening. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for loving me. Forever yours, Zuzanna." Generations of McAllister descendants would read that letter and learn the story of how their family began, with a woman whose accent was thick and a cowboy who listened harder than anyone else, proving that love often begins with the simple but profound choice to truly hear another person. The town of Redemption changed over the decades and centuries, growing from a small frontier settlement into a thriving community. But it never forgot its history, never forgot the lessons learned from those early days when prejudice and ignorance were overcome by patience and understanding. The story of Zuzanna Kowalski McAllister became part of the town's founding mythology, told and retold, a reminder that the strength of a community lies not in sameness but in the ability to embrace and celebrate difference. In 2025, the town celebrated its sesquicentennial, marking 150 years since its founding. As part of the celebration, the mayor, who happened to be a fifth-generation descendant of Samuel McAllister, gave a speech about the town's history and values. "Redemption," she said, standing in front of the Historical Society building, "has always been a place of second chances, of new beginnings. But more than that, it has been a place where people chose to listen to each other, to overcome their initial prejudices and fears, to build something together." The story of my great-great-great-grandmother, Zuzanna McAllister, and my great-great-great-grandfather, Jonas McAllister, exemplifies what this town has always been at its best. A place where being different is not a liability but an asset. A place where listening is valued as much as speaking. A place where love can flourish if we just give it the chance. After the speech, people gathered at the cemetery on the hillside, placing flowers on Jonas and Zuzanna's grave. The oak tree that Jonas had planted was now massive, its branches spreading wide to provide shade over the gravesite. Sitting under that tree, listening to the wind rustle through the leaves, it was easy to imagine the presence of the two people buried there, the cowboy and the teacher whose love story had become legend. And perhaps in some way that transcends understanding, Jonas and Zuzanna were present, watching over the family they had created, the community they had helped build, satisfied with the legacy they had left behind. A legacy built not on wealth or fame, but on the simple, powerful foundation of two people who chose to listen to each other, to see past surface differences to the humanity beneath, to build a life together based on mutual respect, shared dreams, and abiding love. That, in the end, was the true moral of their story. That love requires listening. That understanding requires effort. That the most profound connections are often formed when we choose to hear what others are saying, even when it's difficult, even when they speak with an accent we're not familiar with, even when it would be easier to dismiss them and move on. Jonas McAllister could have walked past that general store in 1878 and left Zuzanna Kowalski to struggle alone. Most people did, but he chose differently. He chose to listen harder than anyone else. And that choice, that simple but profound choice, changed everything. It created a family, built a home, established a legacy that would endure for generations. In the end, that's what love is. A choice. A choice to listen, to understand, to stand beside someone even when the rest of the world walks away. A choice to see potential where others see problems, to hear music where others hear noise, to find home in another person's heart. Jonas and Zuzanna made that choice every day for over 40 years. And in doing so, they proved that the greatest love stories are not the flashiest or the most dramatic, but the ones built on a foundation of genuine understanding, patient listening, and the courage to love someone exactly as they are, accent and all. Their story ended, as all stories must, but the echoes of it continued, rippling out through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, through the students Zuzanna taught, and the lessons she imparted, through the community that learned from their example. And on quiet evenings in Redemption, Texas, when the wind blows just right across the prairie and through that old oak tree on the hillside, you can almost hear it still, that thick Polish accent and the patient Texas drawl responding, a conversation that began in 1878 and somehow never truly ended, a reminder that love, real love, is eternal.